Hello everybody and welcome back to yet another episode of the Gameable Audio, a VGM podcast. This week is another amazing episode that we're going to talk about. I am your host, Christofer Schenström as well, and with me for this specific episode is none other than the mighty legend, David Wise. Hello!
Hello, how are you?
I am great. I'm actually super stoked about this. Of course, just like many other peoples that you've been interviewed with, a lot of people look up to you as a composer. A lot of people have played the games that you've been working on and so on, of course, with a company such as Rare that a lot of people love and adore. So I'm guessing going through all like emotions and everything, everybody is always talking about how great you are and so on. I guess, how does it feel from your point of view? Like you're just a mortal being by the end of the day, so...
Yeah, I mean, it's nice, and I appreciate that people are interested in my work, but sometimes it gets slightly uncomfortable because I just see me as just, well, you know, I come into my studio every day, got a schedule I need to deliver, and that's been the same for 3 decades, so it hasn't really changed. But I'm glad people do appreciate what I've done, because it keeps me busy now, so that's all good.
That's amazing, and I just love and adore so much music that you have produced, and I know a lot of people out there in the world love and adore these tracks. Of course, there are multiple tracks that I love and adore myself. I'm just super stoked just to have you here to talk about one of your latest works. Of course, you still have most likely a lot of other soundtracks in progress, but I'm guessing this is one of the latest released ones.
Yes, yeah, I mean... We're not going to talk about it, but there was another one released today. So, so I'm busy, and there's another one coming out later this year as well. Perhaps first thing next year, but yeah, there's a few in the pipeline, and they all got delayed because of the COVID lockdowns. Now people have been free. You know, the teams have come back together. People can work together. Yeah. And so they're going through that pipeline of being released now, which is good. You know, there's a lot of exciting games ready for Christmas.
Yeah. But I would say you're one of those composers that have been working mostly within video games and video game music composition and so on. So I think this is like one of the greater questions for me to ask you. It's like, where did you actually start out? What actually got you into music, first of all?
What got me into music? I would say probably... when I was at home, when I was a kid, I was living with my mum and dad, my older brother and my younger sister. My brother was going for piano lessons. I kind of like music, and I wanted piano lessons too. Couldn't quite afford them, so I listened to my brother playing the piano, and I found that I could listen to him and just play it on the piano afterwards. So that kind of got me into music. I also like listening to music as well, as you know, most of us do, which is good. So it was just being able to listen to something, play it back, and then I'd start noodling around with my own ideas, not realising that was composition, but of course it is. So I'd just be making it up as we go along, which is the definition of being a composer.
It's so interesting as well, looking at some other interviews. You talked a little bit about what kind of inspired you and what you kind of worked with back in the day. And I remember reading something about Phil Collins, Def Leppard, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, my early influences, I mean, the strongest influence was probably a band called The Police. I was really into drumming. I mean, my progression is I started having piano lessons, then I started playing trumpet after that, then I went on to the drums, and then since then I've taken up bass, guitar, saxophone, and many other instruments. But The Police, when I was sort of late teens, well, no, probably earlier than that, mid-teens, The Police were really quite big, and they really inspired me, especially their drummer, Stuart Copeland, very influential and very creative. And I think that the other thing with The Police as well that I like, not that I do it with my own music, because I can always find things to, but I like the space that they put in their music. And today I should remember that space really is a good thing. It's just too easy to fill it with something. Oh, that'd be a great idea. Sometimes it just needs space.
Yeah. But in this case, you also had some influence from your siblings there as well, considering working with the piano and so on. But what actually made you get into more types of instruments? Was there any specific motivation you had there?
No, not really. I was working in a music shop in a place called Leicester, which is in the heart of England, right in the middle. And I was upstairs selling drums.
Oh, okay.
Not many people used to come upstairs for drum bits. You know, there were a few people. I can remember once upon a time, Alex Van Halen from a band called Van Halen, he came up.
Oh, okay.
Bought some drumsticks. We had quite a few people who were well known. But on the whole, I was up there being quite bored. And there were a lot of people downstairs. Now, one day, a company called Yamaha came in and they had their computer called the CX5.
Yeah.
And they promised us that computers and music were the future.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my father was teaching at the university. He was really into computers, and I was really into playing drums, rock and roll. You know, they didn't go together. So I completely ignored it. About 3 months later, Yamaha come back into the shop and said, look, we really need somebody to really learn this software and start selling them. That they're selling really well in other parts of the country. You know, you can sell a lot of these. Now, that manual was in Japanese.
Okay.
So it was pretty hard to work out. And I thought, you know, this looks like a lot of hard work. I'm not interested until the manager of the store said, well, anybody who learns it, they can take it home and they can have an extra day off per week. And at that point, I was completely sold. So I took it home, tried to get through the manual as much as possible and learn how to use it. And then I could connect it to other synths and drum machines. And then at that point, I could hook songs up like Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight, Duran Duran, lots of other songs, Go West, We Close Our Eyes. So I got these on demo. And pretty much anybody who came into the store and saw the MIDI side of things would go, yep, that's it. They'd get it on hire purchase, go to the office, I'd do a sale. Yep. And I was selling several of these a week, and they were quite expensive at the time. On one occasion, two gentlemen came in. I'd done the whole sales pitch to them, and they said, have you got any more songs? And I was very apologetically saying, well, I've got some of my own. And they said, oh, yeah, let's hear those. So I played them. And one turned to the other and said, monsters. I was a bit confused. And then they said, look, have you got an office? I thought, oh, that's it. I've sold all of this equipment. I sold another computer. I sold some keyboards, a drum machine, a sequencer. So I went up to the office, and they're always getting the forms out for the hire purchase. And it was a guy called Tim Stamper, and he said, I tell you what, I'm just going to buy all of the synths and the computer. Do you want to come and work for us? And that's how I got my job at Rare Limited.
Oh, okay. That's really interesting. So that was kind of banana peeling straight into the office. That's actually really interesting.
That was my foray and introduction to composing music for a living. And I've done it ever since.
That's actually pretty interesting, working at a music shop and just going from selling and working a little bit on it by yourself with instruments and so on. And that kind of what gave you intel on you, so you could.
Well, I suppose so. I mean, other famous people have gone on and they've had similar experiences. So there was the guy who runs Spectrasonics. Yeah. He also worked at a music store and then went on to program synths, and then I think Roland got hold of him, went to work for Roland, and then he set up. And he's obviously got a very successful company called Spectrasonics, and I use their sounds as well. And John Lemcool, I believe he was doing something similar. He started programming his own sounds and went to work for Korg. He's still working in the industry. So we've got these similar backgrounds, but obviously went into different parts of creating music or producing music. Yeah,
it's interesting. But also, just to have a little bit more of a time frame, what age were you when you started at Rare?
So I was probably 19.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but how did it feel also then to start working at the video game company at that point in time? I'm guessing it was still quite early on with video games and so on, even in UK.
It was extremely early on. And if you mentioned that you were writing music for video games, they'd think you were writing plings and plongs and you know, very, very basic. And I suppose in some ways we were, because the Nintendo 8-bit system or the Commodore 64, they sounded like glorified doorbells, because those chips were used in doorbells at that time.
Actually, I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, very similar chips. They sounded the same. They had the same voicing. So.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love these kind of bits and pieces myself, because this is information I didn't know myself.
Okay.
A lot of people usually tend to talk about these, like, they have the 4 channels and so on. One is triangle and so on. Yeah,
2 pulse waves, a triangle, and a noise channel. And, you know, at best, it sounds like a doorbell.
So when you started out at the company, I mean, most of this, I'm guessing you worked with usual instruments and so on, and of course with a synth. I'm guessing, how much programming did you do with the synth back in the day?
Well, I had my synth. I think it was a Korg Poly 800. I also had a Korg SQ1D, which was a sequencer.
Yeah.
The main keyboard I actually used was a Roland Juno 2. And there's a company called TAL, or Togu Line, and they do virtual instrument called the Talfa. And it is almost, it sounds identical. So by playing it, it's memory lane, straight back to the late 1980s. Obviously the Yamaha CX5, which had an FM chip. So I learned to program FM sounds long before I started on the subtractive sounds, which was, a different way around.
Yeah.
So that was my office. And for 3 weeks, they said, look, just go in your office. You've got all these tools. Just go crazy, create. So I did, wrote lots of tunes. Came back to them and they said, yes, sounds great, but you've got to now convert it onto that games machine you've been playing Mario on, the first Mario.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, Christ, how am I going to do that? Sorry. And I said, oh dear, how am I going to do that? And so that was my introduction into 6502 coding.
Okay. And I'm guessing you weren't that used to it in the beginning either, or?
No, they'd written some subroutines, and so I was basically typing in data. So it wasn't music data, I couldn't use MIDI.
Yeah.
We were using a hex value for the actual pitch of the note, another hex value for the length of the note, and then you'd have that for 4 channels, and you'd call it the voices, and you might add some pitch modulation or some volume modulation onto that, and it was all very 8-bit, very crude, very noisy, because it's a development system, lots of interference from VCRs and things like that, and TVs, and even the lighting. So it was very crude, very basic. You'd type the numbers in, they all had to add up, otherwise it went horribly wrong.
Yeah.
You'd assemble it, you'd wait a minute, and then you'd hear all of your mistakes back, which you'd have to go in and fix.
Oh my God.
So there was a lot of iterations, thousands of iterations.
I'm guessing a lot of trial and error as well, right?
Oh, yeah, there's a huge amount of trial and error, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was learning on the job.
Yeah.
We had games to get out, so I just had to throw a lot of time in it, and a lot of focus and a lot of energy.
And going through a little bit of, you've created a lot of different games. In total, what I could see is a little bit over 55 games now that I could see in
I think in reality, even by the time we got to the SNES, we were probably at 50.
Yeah.
So it's probably well over 100 at this point.
Yeah.
I can count 80. And I think I've done a few more I've forgotten about or wish to forget about.
Yeah. But considering also the different kind of consoles and everything you've been working on, I mean, you have the NES, you have the Commodore, you have Genesis, Game Gear, and so on. There's just so many different consoles and everything. Like, how was it to kind of work on each and every one of them, if we can just generalize it? Was it hard to work on so many different consoles?
Even up to the SNES and including the Super NES, I was still coding or putting it in hex data stuff. And so we had a very familiar interface, and they just changed the code behind it.
Oh, okay.
However, when it came to things like the Genesis, that's when the Yamaha CX5, which had an FM chip, it was only 2 operator, but you've got the basics there of exciting one operator with another and creating sounds. So I already knew the FM programming side of things.
Yeah.
And it made sounds, it's a bit more interesting than just having a pulse wave or a triangle wave. So that was quite cool. With the Super NES, we had samples, and that was a whole new ball game.
Yeah.
So we can get incredibly technical at this point, but I think we'll lose the audience.
Yeah, I think we kind of know exactly a little bit more about how it sounds and everything, so we don't need to go too much specifics in this case. I just wanted to touch a little bit on the subject that you worked on a lot of different consoles and so on for people that don't know you from the beginning.
I mean, there's a lot of different consoles, there are a lot of different styles, but for a composer, there were lots of things to keep you excited and interested. And I, to this day, I still like a challenge, so bring it on. And that was very much the attitude back then. If there's something new to try, let's dive in and see what we come up with.
Yeah. One thing I remember from one of the interviews, I read something about that you wouldn't like to go back because of all the kind of limitations and so on that you have, that you can still utilize and kind of use a tracker today, but keep out of the limitations.
So today I can spend a week, 2 weeks, and get something that sounds you could show everybody, say, oh, I did that.
Yeah.
Whereas back in the day, spend 2 weeks, create something, you'd play your friends or your parents, and so I did this, and they'd be going, really? It sounded well like a doorbell. So
yeah.
I don't think they appreciated the video game aspect of it. So it was a lot of hard work to get something that sounded not very cool. Whereas these days you can put as much energy into that and get something that you're very pleased to listen to, and it might be calming, it might excite you. Other people might like it. It's much more rewarding as a composer.
And following up on everything, I mean, going through all the different consoles, you're also going through a lot of generations, of course, because you've been pretty active, though, even all over these years, which is super fun to see. Sometimes you can see some composers working very efficiently in the beginning, and then they kind of disappear, and then they return again. But it seems, considering from the games I can find, you've been pretty active all the time.
Yeah, I've only had a year off, and that was just to sort my life out. I was getting divorced, and that needed quite a bit of effort to get through it. But apart from that, I've been busy writing music, and mainly because I enjoy writing music.
Yeah,
it's what excites me. It's what excites
I can
me
tell
when I get
you
out
love
of bed.
it.
So and I love the electronic side of it as well. I'm really fascinated by sound in general, and the way that sounds work to influence composing or different musical ideas. It's really cool. There's, I need another 5 lifetimes to explore what I want to already.
And considering also today with skipping all these limitations and so on, kind of sky's the limit as well, right?
It's the limit, but you've got to put a lot of work in to get, to explore these things. So I've got one virtual instrument, which it's a modeling synth, and it sounds really, really cool, but I'd need about, 6 or 7 months to get the best out of it.
Yeah.
But it's a really super cool instrument. Sadly, I don't have time to do that because, people are waiting on me for other projects to finish.
Yeah. Always limitations in some way, anyway.
Always, absolutely.
If it's not limiting by a sound chip, it's limiting time. So yeah, but instead of going through each and every game here, I mean, you've been working as a freelance since, when was it? I think I remember noticing, but I think since you have the numbers...
it's at least probably about 17 years I've been freelance.
And that was the time when you quit working at Rare.
Yeah, I'd done a few personal things to sort out, and also at Rare they were working on the Kinect, the Xbox Kinect thing, and it was... For me, it didn't excite me.
Okay.
As a controller or a system, and I couldn't be as involved as I'd want to be. So it just seemed to be a great time. It was just convenient. You had to be a good time to take a break from the industry for a year. Yeah. So it solved a lot of things. And then when I came back, I obviously went to work for Retro Studios.
And considering that, ever since you've been working on so many different kind of games, one game that I've played that I kind of liked, especially from the music perspective, was Yooka-Laylee.
Oh yeah, I mean Grant did most of that, so Steve Burke and myself helped on that, and then I did a few more for the second game. But yeah, it was an interesting thing. The nice thing about that, it was nice to work with people I'd worked before with at Rare.
That was why I wanted to specifically name that game as well.
But coincidentally, when I went to, over to Austin, there were people from Rare who I'd worked with before.
Okay.
Who'd come over from America to work with us at Rare, and there I was, with, reverse kind of thing.
Playing the Uno reverse card.
Yeah, and I think most game companies have a similar ideology, so it always feels good to be in the office working, partnering with people, because you get so many more ideas when you can just pick a controller up, play, see some new art, and you instantly get ideas, and you instantly want to get involved and write something new for it. Yeah.
And one thing that I kind of like to ask you is considering also the differences now. I mean, working from one specific studio like Rare, and also being a freelance, now you can literally work with anybody all over the world because, first of all, music is a universal language as well.
Yeah, and I do, which is great.
But how does it feel also from your perspective to be able to work with so many different people? Does it always feel like new and inspirational all the time, or can it be a little bit too much sometimes having so much different people?
No, it's definitely not too much. I like the variety and the fact that it does generate new things.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the most fascinating games I worked on was over in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And I worked with a team there who are producing a game, and all of these scales, it's sort of a fusion between Western, but everything's in a traditional Arabian scale. And then once we finished writing the soundtrack, we went over to Egypt to record it with proper, musicians who knew the scales and everything. And they did just the most wonderful job of bringing that together.
Amazing.
And it's things like that, those new challenges where you're exploring new sonic territory. Those are the really interesting things. And I wouldn't swap that for the world. And if I was still working in-house, the chances of being able to do that would be very slim.
Yeah. But I think this is also a great segue, also considering looking at new instruments and so on. A great segue to talk about today's game, Gimmick 2. And just so everybody has a little bit of a glimpse of the game. Gimmick 2 is a physics-based platformer game where the player takes the role of the green yokai Yumitaro. And Yumitaro has the power to create stars, in which he can use as either a platform, but he can also use it as a weapon to fend off enemies. And that's kind of like the smallest kind of situation of what's going on with the game. And as the two might say to people, yes, this is a sequel. It's not really a direct sequel or anything, because from what I understand of the story, you're kind of rescuing the daughter of the first person in the first game.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reference really to the original, so it has elements of the original, but it's really a new type of game based on an old game, so it's got a loose connection.
And it's kind of hard for people also to know a little bit about Gimmick, because the first game was so limited released as well. I mean, only having a Japanese release, but also Scandinavia.
True, and also it had an enhanced sound chip on the cartridge. There was an extra chip, so you had those extra waveforms like a triangle wave and 3 extra channels as well. So as I can remember Chris Stamper, who was one of the 2 Stamper brothers working at Rare, showing me this new cartridge, and I was thinking, well, that's just not fair. I don't have access to these extra channels. Yeah. How can I compete? So we don't need to worry about that because we've got the Super NES, and that's going to have 8 channels, and you've got samples. So that's as far as the FOMO went, really.
There are some other cartridges on the NES that had this. I think HAL Laboratory had their own kind of chip, and Sunsoft had their own. Yeah. Absolutely. So it's always interesting. And of course, there are some references to the old game in this soundtrack. We're not going to listen to any of them today.
Yes.
As we're going to focus on the specific ones you did originally for this game.
Yeah. I mean, the scope of the game changed a little whilst we were in development. And so the pacing of the game was slightly different. But I still think it worked well because you've got that nice contrast between the original and the faster-paced games and the more thoughtful ones where you have the gameplay slightly different anyway.
And also, just to have this named, I noticed this as a note on the homepage. The OST was also creatively directed by Pelle Karleby and was recorded live in Sweden together with Joel Billa, which I also have had an interview with on some games that he worked on.
Joel is he's an amazing musician, he's a great composer, and he's just like this audio wizard. Great to have him on the team. I hope we get to work again.
I hope so.
in the future. So I mean, he's just like, amazing. So definitely recommend Joel. He's just brilliant.
He is a great guy. I've met him personally, and also been interviewing actually twice.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, I mean, he's lovely, and his understanding of instruments, especially Swedish.
And he's curious. He's very curious about sounds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Completely. Yeah. So the nickel harper, he introduced me to the nickel harper, and one of his friends is like the most amazing nickel harper player. And you're thinking, well, I didn't know about nickel harper until 10 minutes ago. Where's this come from? I had a virtual instrument, and it's reminiscent of a nickel harper, but when you hear a nickel harper in the studio in front of you, all these overtones that are coming off, and it sounds completely magical, whereas the virtual instrument, not so magical.
It's always better live. That's how it's the best.
Yeah, definitely. It's always better in situation and in context. So, even if you record it, you're going to lose something. But being right next to it and hearing this, I don't know, it's like a crossover instrument. It's very unique.
Having also the bits and pieces of being like a perfection, but also having faults in itself. It's like having something played live and always in pure perfection is, well, hard. So I think having just the more organic kind of sound of it, being able to have it being both perfect but also at fault at sometimes, it kind of brings it more alive.
It brings a certain character to the recording, which you certainly would not get with a virtual instrument.
Exactly, because it will always kind of sound perfect in some sense, but it's kind of that uncanny valley going on.
I mean, it's good to have a virtual instrument. It means that you can compose and get something ready for performing. But then when you bring the real instruments in, when you bring the nickel harper, when you bring the flute, and we have the most amazing flute player.
Yeah.
And, acoustic guitar and accordion as well.
Yep.
When you bring all of those instruments in and together and you've got them real, it just brings something that you just can't get from virtual instruments.
That's amazing. But yeah, I think it's time for us to listen to the first track of the week as well from this game, Gimmick 2. So the first track that we're going to listen to is Tadpole Temple Swamp. Fading out the first track of the week, this was Tadpole Temple, the swamp version of it. There, every kind of, I would say, level in this case always have two types of tracks, but this was the swamp level. And as always, I always have my little emotion coming in with everything. And this is me basically leaning backwards in my chair, closing my eyes, just taking in the audio from this track fully. And just to have this reference as well, I did play this game prior to listening to it, so I kind of have a little bit situation going on of the game before I kind of had this emotion going through. But my emotion for Tadpole Temple Swamp is the bird noises seems a little bit out of place, but they become such a part of the melody with their chirping that it kind of overtakes the track and becomes very pleasant. I do not know why, but the flow of the melody reminds me of the game Yooka-Laylee. A game that I know you've been composing for as well. Anyway, the track gives off a serene audioscape, a calm and foresty style. So that was my kind of take on it. What do you feel?
See, my kind of take on it was, we've got these chords, and I can use a swell, like a filter swell on it. And that was so hard to achieve on the Super NES. So I was pleased that I could use those. And the idea with it was for it to be mysterious. So I haven't been to that many swamps, if I'm honest. But from watching them on nature programs, that they always seem almost still with this underlying busyness going on. So we kind of want two things. We want this very busy, bird chirps and stuff. Then we also want this lyrical flute.
Yeah.
just to keep it calm with the calming chords and carry it along. So there's two musical things there, really. We've got like this busy city, and if we go into the swamp, but when you look at it from a distance, you've got this nice calm thing going on. So that was the feeling behind that.
Yeah.
And when I first played it, it did seem to be a much calmer level where you're going to have to use your cerebral powers to get through the level.
Yeah. And also all the tracks that we're going to listen to is of course going to be more chronological from how you play the game as well. So people have that back in the mind as we progress in listening to all the different songs in this episode. But as this is also the first track that we're going to listen to, I'm a little bit interested in, like, how did you get in contact with Bitwave Games in order to get to work on this project?
They got in contact with me. They sent an email, or Nicholas sent an email and said, how would you like to work on this project? And I was like, yeah, it looks cool to me. I'm good.
Yeah. But I'm guessing, were you did you know about Mr. Gimmick prior to this as well? Or was Mr. Gimmick 2 like a surprise for you? It's like, oh, whoa.
Well, I obviously knew Gimmick from the first release, decades before it, but obviously you're not going to know about Gimmick 2 because everything's under a non-disclosure agreement, so hopefully nobody said anything. So that was the first I heard when they said, we're going to be resurrecting Gimmick. Again, there was a long period between both of those, so it's reminding myself of the IP that was quite important.
But also having this, like, I guess this could be like a revenge for you. You didn't get access to the sound chip, and now you get to work on the sequel.
True, but very much so. But even better because we had the the real Swedish instruments like the harp and everything. So it was
you kind of upped the game.
Yeah, kind of a huge upgrade.
Yeah. When you got into this project, I'm guessing you needed to talk a little bit about references and so on, or what was the first steps getting into this and starting to kind of build out this soundtrack as well?
The first thing I did was to listen to the soundtrack over and over again, just to get an idea of the original tunes. Now, I felt the original style isn't really applicable because it's not an NES game. It's got a different pace, it's got a different feel to it. But some of the melodies were quite nice, and through all of my tunes, I've actually picked out little bits of melody that were in the original and used them as part of the basis for the tunes that I've created.
So it kind of returns a little bit with small motifs almost. Yeah.
I'm not sure, you sort of referenced ukulele, but I'm not sure I was the composer who did the swamp music for ukulele. So, which is kind of interesting.
For me, just listening to the soundscape, it had this kind of calm, but also kind of playful, and that's kind of what I had with ukulele as well.
Yeah.
So those were the kind of similarities for me sound-wise.
So, and then some of the melodies, as I've said, were taken from the original, and I've adapted them to be an adventure exploratory, to be an adventure and an exploratory game. How'd you say exploratory?
Exploration, maybe.
Exploration. Let's go with exploration.
But also one thing, considering that you listened through the old game, the first game first of all, just to get a little bit of a glimpse of how they can interpret the music for... I mean, for me, who played the game a little bit, of course, I played it in my later years, but for me, it feels more like the game tried to have more of an identity of what was going on in the levels, and that's how I kind of interpreted the levels. First of all, the first song that I love and adore, I still love it to this day, is the Happy Birthday track, which I also know it was an arranged version you did on this one.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
As well. And that one is kind of, for me, it feels a little bit more like Yumitaro. That's his theme, because he was this birthday gift right from the start, as he was mistaken as a toy. And as the game kind of starts with that, it kind of felt like, oh, this is his track. But how did you feel when you worked on the music and then started understanding it? Or would you like to more give the environment identity, or was it still something going on within the levels that you wanted to represent through the music?
I think what I wanted to represent was, for me, when I was playing at the pace of the level, and also the environment, really, because we're in a swamp and we need it to sound, well, swamp-like.
Yeah.
And so, again, just getting some of the original melodies in there and weaving them in and out. Some of them were quite hidden, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
But to hopefully give a vibe of the original without it being like the original, because it's a completely different system, it's a different game. It's just got references. So I was just trying to keep the references subtle.
But I'm guessing also since, well, you're a composer and you've been working with compositions for so long, you have your own identity as well, of course.
Yeah, that's probably why you get hired, one would imagine. You've got a certain style, and people hopefully want that in their product. So if you're doing, referencing a sort of retro style game, then you might want to get a retro style composer. That said, if I got the opportunity to do a space game or a creepy haunting game, I'd jump at it just to do something slightly different. And that's not that I don't love doing this type of game. I just like to do something completely different. Like
the challenge then?
Yeah, the challenge. Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. But one thing that I find interesting here is specifically the birds here. Of course, I love birds myself because I can whistle as a bird. I'm not going to do it right now, but how come you wanted to select using birds as some sort of instrument for this track?
Well, I think there's some of the bird noises are actually frogs. It was mainly frogs that I used for the rhythm. And it came really from the swamp on the Super NES, on Donkey Kong Country 2, where I've used some environmental sounds. And that was a solution to a problem that we couldn't have a separate ambience because we'd lose too many channels. So I used the animal noises within the percussion track. So it's still something I still like to do. I might I might disguise it a bit more these days. But some of the rhythm, it's just nice if you can put a few animal noises in there, just that are reminiscent of a swamp or whatever the environment is. So it's just quirky things like that I enjoy doing that keep me interested whilst I'm writing the melody.
I love this. Also, when it comes to the soundtrack as well, was there any specific track that you kind of dove right into right from the start, or were you working on multiple tracks right off the bat? Because it all depends on when you joined into the project, right?
Yeah, I think I was probably quite early into the project. The first one that I did was Lake Splash.
Okay.
And that's like a boat tune that you're on this boat going across the lake. And that gave me a chance to put a lot of instruments in that were Swedish, just to really set the tone for how I saw the game going. So hopefully playful, but also with a bit of depth emotionally in there as well.
Yeah. Also, one thing that we didn't really point towards, but of course, as Mr. Gimmick was only released in Japan and Scandinavia, one thing that has been said is that you have a lot of inspiration between Japanese music, but also Swedish music. Of course, we already talked about the nyckelharpa and so on. Were there any specific instruments from the Japanese
Oh, yeah, sure.
Shakuhachi
and koto, which are two wonderful instruments. I'd used those before for Nyam Nyam's game, Tengami. So it was nice to revisit those instruments.
So when you're utilizing new instruments, first of all, maybe we should start there. Those two instruments, for people that don't know them, what type of instruments are they? First of all, I don't know about them that much.
Okay, shakuhachi is a flute. It's got a very distinctive sound. Obviously sounds very Japanese. And the koto it's like a harp, but you can bend the strings at the top.
Oh, interesting.
So it's kind of like a harp or a zither. And then you've got a bit of the extra control at the top end, and you can do some nice pitch modulation.
So is it more? Can you utilize it as some sort of vibrato, almost like bending it in that
yeah.
sense?
It's more. It's probably more severe than vibrato. You can actually bend notes up and stuff just to give. It's very distinctive. Very magical. It's very zen.
Oh, I love Japanese instruments myself.
Oh yeah, cool.
I love the culture and everything.
Yeah, and then I use a lot of percussion instruments from Japan as well. So a lot of the percussion is actually Japanese.
Oh, okay.
And they have other Japanese instruments in there. Whatever I could find that I could utilize, it's in there.
So did a lot of research go into just to find different kind of instruments and so on, and you started listening to the soundscape they could create, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. The Native Instruments had brought a Japanese sound pack out, which was cool, although I had other sounds anyway. Like the koto sound, I'd taken an original koto sample library, but then added the pitch bend, that you could do with the strings after. But if you do too much of that, it sounds almost too realistic and kind of veers away from Western familiarity. So yeah, you can't use it too much, so it's used very subtly.
But also one thing that comes to mind for myself is when you're working with new instruments, for example, do you usually tend to work with these instruments yourself, or do you buy them digitally and experiment with them there, or?
Yeah, these were virtual instruments that I bought and then experimented with the sounds and what I could get out of them. And also at the same time, we've got this wonderful utility called YouTube.
Yeah.
So you can pull up proper koto music, and it's actually more used to see somebody performing it live because you can see what they do with the instrument. And that's the most useful way of learning how to use how they might, or how we might as composers use those instruments.
Can that help even if they're the virtual sound libraries?
Oh,
seeing
yeah.
how they use them.
It's
live.
important to know the range and how those sounds can be used, how much pitch bend they can use, how much, how the air travels through the instrument, how much vibrato is there. Just things like that, little subtle things that all helps. Because when we've got a virtual instrument, we want to create a performance, even though it's, it's a virtual instrument. I've got all these controllers here that I can dynamically alter the instrument. And that really, really helps to create the performance. Because really, it's that melody and how things are coming across. You want that performance.
And one thing that comes to mind with the Gimmick soundtrack is overall is kind of, I would say it's more of the calmer kind of side of the game. We can see this through the graphical points as well, as it's kind of luster, very colorful and happy in the colors. Of course, there are some exceptions in the game as well, so to speak, with the music. But overall, it seems kind of serene.
Yeah, it's a calm and happy game, and especially with the Japanese instruments, that kind of Zen thing, and the Swedish influence as well.
Yeah.
So it's more about exploring.
Yeah.
And going on a journey rather than running like, I don't know.
Raining terror on the enemies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a bit of that, but it's more, as you say, serene than that.
Yeah. I think it's time for us to listen to the next track, as this will bring a little bit of a contrast to what we're listening to. Of course, this is going to be a little bit more hectic in the sense of what we listen to with the Tadpole Temple here. So the next track that we're going to listen to is the Arctic Ascent and the Lava version of it. Arctic Ascent, Lava version. My emotion for this one starts off nice and easy, but early on kicks off and draws up the tempo. This track becomes more hectic, almost like a party remix. It's more swingy, and it really pulls on the tempo to create stress as it racks up. So that's my emotion on that one. And of course, while I was playing this game, yes, it was a very hectic section. There's a lot of things going on at the same time. And I think the track itself kind of pars up with this. But I would like to hear a little bit. Was this a little bit more on point what you were after with the track as well? My emotion.
Yeah, I mean, the music in general can really affect how the player goes through a game. Yeah, and it's meant to ramp up the tension. And it's if it's doing that, then it's doing its job, which is good. Instrumentally, I think there's a bit of because it's the lava. I like to use Indian instruments in there as well. So, although originally I used a shakuhachi, but we used the live flute, which I think sounds better, but he's done it in a kind of similar style for the melody there. And it's got a bit more tension, a bit more tempo. We're trying to panic the player into failing as he's being... we're trying to unsettle the player so they fail, basically.
It is always so nice when I look at and trying to kind of digest a little bit why the music is like it is. Of course, you can either have like the full contrast of like you have a stressful moment, you can have a really nice like calm track, or you can kind of have a stressful thing, but you even stress it even more with the music. Like a boss level, almost.
Yeah, it's going in that. I think the first one I did was a bit more severe than this, and I was reminded to keep it playful. You know, it's Shumataro. So, yeah. The other thing I like to use are synths, and you can get quite nasty with synths. In fact, Cherry Audio have just brought one out, which is a Russian synth, or based on a Russian synth, and that's really mean. So I'm really looking forward to using that soon. And I'd used a synth here called Razor originally, but it was just a bit too drastic. You know, kids weren't ready for that yet. So
it's too hip.
So we changed it. I think it's an accordion doing that part.
Yeah. Interesting. But as I noted down here, it felt a little bit almost like a party remix. And the reason why I kind of pointed that out as well is, of course, the Lava is the second version we have in this level. Of course, this kind of points out a little bit more to that it feels like you're doing remixes to your own work. You don't actually tend to listen to as many composers making their own remixes as well. You can usually hear another composer working on those. But how did it feel for you working on the, well, so-to-called remixes in this case?
I mean, often we as composers, we're called to do a different version, especially with interactive music. Yeah, and it's always fun. But I think because it increased the pace, we're trying to rush the player. It feels more like a remix than a different version. But often I find that when I'm doing a different version, we've normally kept the same tempo. But here we threw caution to the wind, faster tempo. Let's go for it. And it's always fun to do a remix. I find it easy to do remixes of other people's music. It's a bit harder with your own music because you've already done it. You've already got a mental image of how you think it should go.
Yeah.
And therefore, when you're doing a remix, you've got to bring something new, something fresh to the party. But here that was easy because we've got a different background. We've got lava, so there's different textures to play with. And in this scenario, it gets a lot easier to do it.
But in contrast to the first version, of course, we're not going to listen to it specifically here, but just to talk a little bit about it. Since this felt more hectic, was there more layers that was added to it in order to create that?
Yeah, we've got more percussion. More percussion, and the instrumentation has obviously changed. And there's more textures in there, so there's a lot going on in the background, even if it's not expressed explicitly in the front. We kept with the flute, but there are... What's that Indian instrument? Sorry. What's it called? A sitar, that's it.
Oh, sitar, yeah.
So as part of the background for this, I've subtly put a sitar in just to add an extra layer of interest.
Okay. From the beginning, I really liked the snow version of the Arctic Ascent as well. In one of these kind of main sections, you can also hear in the lava, and it's like...
Yeah, I've got this tune that I'd written, and the people at Bitwave seemed to like that tune, and so they wanted that integrated with all of the tunes.
Yeah.
So I did that right at the end after I'd written all the tunes. I went through and integrated that all the way through.
So was that kind of a happy little mistake that was happening then, that they really loved and adored that kind of section and they wanted it applied to the rest?
They'd used the technique for their previous game, and they got this section of music or this theme that they wanted to be repeated throughout all of the tunes. So that's where that comes in. And it's nice because you're putting basically a remix of something that you've done or a different version, and just to remind players that we're still in the same game.
I like that kind of what, like you're pointing out, playing the same game. Usually, I know when I talk to other composers, you can either use that kind of motif to either represent like the character or the world, for example. But in this case, when we're talking about in this game, what does it represent in this case?
For me, it represents Yamateru. It's just it's the theme that I've given to Yumotaro, and it's reminding us that we're in the Gimmick environment.
Yeah, so it's almost like a hero motif then.
I guess so, yeah. Absolutely. But I think leitmotifs are really useful. We don't hear them as much as we should do in modern scores, so it's nice to be able to use them.
Yeah, going a little bit back to old school then.
Yeah, I like old school. I am old school. I am the definition of old school.
Oh, I love this. So the tracks in this OST is also really, really great. And one thing that I really liked about this is kind of the connection that kind of shines through all the melodies as well. Maybe it is only the hero motif that I hear so many times, but I feel like I felt like home most of the times as I was playing through the game. And I don't know if it's just you and your classical style that made me just feel like warm and at home because of all the different games like Donkey Kong Country and so on. And it kind of reminded me of that home to some sense. How do you feel yourself in the sense of compositioning? Like, we're talking a little bit about that you like to explore and so on and try to break out, but you're still you working with your own style.
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're John Williams or Hans Zimmer or Gregson Williams. You're always going to have your own way of resolving stuff. And so when I'm listening to pieces of music, I can always tell who's, it's James Newton Howard. Recognise that kind of chord sequence there and the way he's done it with the strings and pushed it down. And the same with Harry Gregson Williams. You can always work his out. Obviously, Hans Zimmer is usually quite easy to spot.
Yeah.
John Williams a bit harder. I can remember Catch Me With You Can, totally different jazz score to his normal work. But every now and again, it's it's John Williams.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, really, because, it's nice to have that style. And it's comforting, isn't it, when you're watching, I don't know, Star Wars and you've got that familiar kind of scene, or we're watching Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And we've got that style. Because that's been replicated by other composers as well when John Williams hasn't been available. So I think it's good to, when we listen to, say, Grant Kirkhope's soundtracks, we always know it's Grant Kirkhope. And it's kind of fun and comforting at the same time. So I think that's a good thing to have.
Yeah, definitely. I like when people, and composers especially, of course, when we're talking about music now, have their own style as well. But it's interesting also to hear something they're not as equally comfortable with as well, challenging themselves, because for me it kind of proves a point that, hey, I'm also on a journey here. I'm not always about doing exactly what everybody else loves. I want to do what I love sometimes. Absolutely.
And the good thing about this soundtrack was I was using instruments I wasn't specifically comfortable using.
Yeah.
And that, for me, that's always a pleasure.
Which instrument was the hardest one to work with for this soundtrack?
I think the nickel harper.
The nickel harper, yeah.
But it was also the most rewarding as well, because it's different when you get the live nickel harper. It's like, oh yeah, that's great.
But since you saw it live as well, were you able to play it yourself a little bit just to try it out?
No, I didn't want to drop it. They were expensive instruments.
They're old and expensive, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of them are unique. And slightly different, and when somebody's played it a lot, it's going to have their own kind of signature built into it. And I just didn't want to mess with somebody who's very good at playing and getting the best out of their instrument. Yeah. So don't touch. Just let them get on with it.
But you don't feel anywhere in your body like that was a missed opportunity not to play it, or?
No, I don't, because I just it's quite complicated. You've got the switches obviously for the keys, and you've also got the strings as well, and. Yeah, that would have taken some learning, really.
Yeah, I was just kind of out of my mind a little bit, just thinking about you as an explorer, like, I want to try them all!
Yeah, I think if somebody gave me one, or I could afford to buy it because they were expensive, then I'd probably spend a bit of time learning how to do it. But you can tell that the people who play these really well have spent years mastering this instrument, and because of it, it's got this magical, almost ethereal sound.
For us in Sweden, when it comes to nickel harpa, we have a couple of famous mainstream artists that utilize this instrument over and over again. So when you hear the nickel harpa in Gimmick, it kind of feels like home, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, of course.
Because for us it's so close to heart because it kind of has been following us for such a long time.
Yeah, and it is, as I've already said, it's a wonderful instrument. It just has a certain magic that you don't get from any other instrument. It's very unique.
Yeah. And one thing that comes to mind when we're talking about nyckelharpa and also these Japanese, it kind of stems a little bit back to me, for me specifically. I might be wrong on this one, but I know nyckelharpa kind of comes back to the folk music.
Yeah.
Does that kind of ring the bell the same for the Japanese instruments as well? Are they more towards Japanese folk music?
So I was in Tokyo earlier this year, and I'm talking to the sax player who was in the orchestra. So there's a piece called Sticker Bush Symphony from Donkey Kong Country 2.
Might have heard of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And apparently the melody is quite similar to a Japanese folk tune.
Oh.
Now, I had no idea. I was just singing it, coming up with this melody. I thought, yeah, that sounds fine. And it goes, you don't think, not a second thought. But apparently it's similar to a traditional Japanese folk tune. So, yeah, these connections with folk music from around the world is really important. Of course, that's what we grew up with, even though we've got orchestral or symphonic pieces. Ultimately, it would go back to a very real somebody sitting in the home playing some instruments and probably together with other people. That was the original folk music. So folk music really is important.
Yeah. It's important kind of to go back to the roots as well, composition-wise sometimes, I feel. I mean, since a lot of different subgenres and genres themselves kind of stemmed out from classical music. It's insane.
I mean, ultimately, classical music must have been a derivative of folk music at some point.
At some point, definitely. Moving onwards as well, I mean, with Japan, for example, are kind of known for their music within fusion, for example. Is that also something you experimented and looked into working on the Gimmick soundtrack?
Not intentionally, really.
No?
I was just messing around with things, seeing what I liked, but there was never... I don't have a master plan when it comes to something. I'll just get on with it and do it rather than overthink it. Because if you overthink things, it's just terrible. It just all goes horribly wrong.
I remember listening in on interview today, actually. It was like 3 years ago, and you got the question about writer's block.
Yeah.
Is this something that can happen, or you're rarely getting writer's block still?
If I'm honest, I rarely get it. I think most of the block is from implementing something.
Okay.
If it's got to be done in a certain way, then you can get stuck getting it in to work with the gameplay, because ultimately it's different from just writing a piece of music. This music has to work with the gameplay. It's got to work within context within the game, and sometimes that can be extremely difficult.
Also, one thing to consider today, of course, back in the day you didn't have any more interactive kind of gameplay with music or dynamic music in that sense.
Yeah.
Of course, you could have some layers sometimes if it was possible, but over time now we have more dynamic sense of making music as well. I'm guessing there weren't too much dynamic music within the Gimmick soundtrack, or was it?
I think we probably touched on it with the lava, as in it changes as we get to the lava, but no, it's probably a more simple implementation of the music, because when you start putting lots of layers in, especially when you've got an orchestra, I mean, there's so many parts that you have to record. Yeah. And there's such a lot of work implementing it. You need a very healthy budget for that kind of game.
Because one of the things that kind of comes to mind when it is just Gimmick, I'm always trying to say Mr. Gimmick. I'm so used to Mr. Gimmick.
Mr. Gimmick's fine.
Mr. Gimmick, yeah. My father calls me Mr. Gimmick. No, but when it comes to Gimmick, it feels like this straightforward kind of exploration adventure game as you move on. So in my opinion, it doesn't really feel like it needs this dynamic kind of layering on top of each other in the same sense like an adventure game in an open world would have.
Yeah, it's quite, I suppose, a linear game, for lack of a better word. So I don't think having too many layers would really work or would even be required. I don't think the game would benefit from having that extra layer of layers.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think it's time for us to go into a more calm track, as the next track is going to be, let's see our little cheat sheet here. The next track is called Fishy Factory, and this is the Warehouse version. Fishy Factory, Warehouse. And my emotion for this one, a more calm and industrial track. It had this mechanical percussion to it, like something in the work and like kind of behind the scenes of the music. Some of the sounds, it really gives this mechanical sounds like plates getting banged up or the sound of something getting recoiled from an older game maybe. I'm a little bit unsure. But overall, this is a really neat track. It really brings calmness to me.
Good.
What was this? Because this one feels so different from the rest of everything else on the soundtrack to me.
So I can remember going through. I've got, I don't know, 200 gigs of sound effects.
Yeah.
And I was just going through finding anything that I could bang with a metal, with a stick and being metallic, and then putting that into a drum kit.
Yeah.
And then making the groove out of that. And also you can hear the synths in the background, and it would be a totally different track with just a different mix. Using exactly the same instrument, you could make it sound really quite industrial rather than laid back and industrial.
Yeah, yeah.
And I like the groove on it as well.
Yeah.
It's meant to be industrial. We're meant to be going through, almost marching through this industrial
Yeah, because you have the kind of structural boom, like you're like you said, marching.
Yeah, so I just imagine all these workers on a production line having to, it can't be a pleasant job, can it? Fish,
Yeah. Fish.
It's going to be quite smelly, quite industrial. I've probably got that mental image of lots of people in this fish factory, really. Not really being very happy to be there, but they've, got money. And so that's got that industrial groove of people just getting on with it, not really thinking about it.
But one thing I really love here is, for me personally, but now I'm talking about my younger self, Donkey Kong Country and so on, you're really good at these slower paced songs. That's for me is when you shine the most.
Okay, cool. Because it's not really that slow. It's just the use of instruments.
Yeah. But
slows it down, gives it that kind of more mellow type of thing, doesn't it?
Because for me, Sticker Brush and Quantic Ambience and so on are really mind-blowing nice songs to just listen to. And for me, when listening to Fishy Factory here, it kind of gave the same kind of sense to me. It kind of brings me to a good headspace, and I can actually think. So for me, if you would have done like a 30-minute remix of this and just had it as a lo-fi, I think a lot of people would use it as a study music.
I mean, we've got 5 minutes of it already. We can loop it. It's not a problem. But, you know, so many people say that to me, that they say, oh, I'll use your music for studying. And which is cool, you know. Yeah. I'm happy about that.
But I'm guessing, I mean, you're still making music from the heart all the time.
Oh yeah, completely.
So
there's no
For me, when I listen to, of course, all music, every song that we're going to talk about, I really love and adore them. But for me, this one kind of strikes a little bit more, and I think for me is due to the fact that it kind of resonates so well with me. But at the same time, when I was playing this game, I felt very calm as well. I felt secure, even though I was in a hostile environment. Because in the warehouse, it becomes a little bit more puzzly comparing to what we had before, as we're moving on to the middle of the game in this case.
Yeah, sure.
So from that perspective as well, were there any thoughts on how the music kind of progressed throughout the game as well, or was it always about the environmental storytelling and etc.?
I think obviously Pelle Kanderby, who was the audio director, he gave me a lot of the cues for the music we were doing for the game. A lot of the times I was taking his brief and what he wanted and the way he saw it, and I was interpreting it as best as I could. But for this one, I really like the idea that it was, you know, we are using industrial sounds to create a piece of music. Because normally if you hear an industrial thud, it's not really that musical, is it? So there's that challenge of taking something that's not normally used as a musical instrument, turning it into a groove. And that's always a nice challenge to have. Yeah.
Trying to add music to something that is not musical.
Yeah. Which would be me. So.
Yeah. But because one of the things when it comes to industrialism, I mean, today we have so much industrial music overall, so it feels like it has become a style of music. But at the same time, if we're just looking at the banging and so on, it's kind of more like white noise, kind of like birds chirping. It also kind of becomes white noise to some extent, especially when you have some sort of melody on top of that already.
Yeah, and also when you listen to those industrial hits as well, you've got the synths that are reversing, and they're buried underneath the pad sound, but they do have textures as well that help drive that rhythm along and add interest outside of the main groove.
Yeah. But also working with an industrial track such as this one, well, I know it's not your first rodeo working with this type of style and so on, but how challenging is it to work with this type of thing that you might not always been working on? If we're talking about this track specifically.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge for sure, but it's a nice challenge. You know, it's something that you want to work out and get involved with. It's like, I suppose, doing a crossword or something that, you know, it's like, how are we going to approach this? What's the solution to this? So that was, I enjoy this kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's always good fun.
And when we were working on the music for this, of course, you were working together with Pelle and like going back and forth. How often do you usually tend to come back with something to him? Did you work on 2 or 3 tracks and then you got back to him and get the feedback, or was it more like one song all the time?
No, I mean, for me, when I'm working, if I've finished something, I'll send it over for feedback. And Pelle would play it back for a couple of days just to get used to it, and then he'd come back with anything that he thought was pertinent to changing it for how he saw the game was going. Yeah.
One thing that I need to ask as well, of course you don't need to go into any specifications or so on, but of course as a freelancer, of course you can't only work on one project. So during the time that you worked on Mr. Gimmick, were you working on multiple projects as well in this case?
I think when I'm working, I try and set out a period of time where I'm just going to be working on the one project.
Okay.
And if I do need to do something different, I'll probably slice out a month to do something different. But I like to be in the groove, and I was sort of post-lockdown. I think this was the first game I did post-lockdown, so I had a nice window of which to just work on this game, which is ideal.
Yep.
And I know I've got some projects coming up where I've sectioned out windows, and I always talk to the client and say, how does, I don't know, December through to April work, for the amount of tracks we need, that I should clear that
period of time then.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always a bit of crossover, but I always try and keep it clear if possible. Yeah, it's hard to do. It's hard to manage.
Especially since you don't always know when work will kind of come in as well. And I'm guessing even for a composer such as you don't have all the time people asking you, or maybe that's the case. No,
it's fair. I mean, fortunately, it's fairly constant, which is great. Let's hope it carries on that way. So if I have to interrupt a project, it will probably be to put some ideas down for somebody, and then I'll throw the can down the road and say, well, I can't work on it now, but this is what I was thinking. If you like it, let's this is my diary.
Yeah.
Let's slot you in. Does that work for you? If it doesn't, then they'll find somebody else I'll suggest somebody else who might be able to help with that.
And that's awesome as well. And that kind of shows a lot of character, not taking all the jobs for yourself. You can actually portion it out to other composers that you know.
Oh yeah, sometimes I just can't physically do it. So and sometimes I do use other composers as well. If I need to get the job done, I'll bring other people in to help me with it.
Do you usually tend to want to work by yourself, or is it more depending on the project if they want to bring in another composer featuring, etc.?
It depends what the time frame is, how quickly we need to get it done. But of course, when you're managing a project when there's multiple composers, then it means I've got less time to compose. So you've got to weigh up these different attributes.
Okay.
Whether, do we bring somebody else in, or do we just get your head down and plow through it?
I see.
It's always nice to work with other people, and I feel that as I've matured as a composer and as a human being, it's nice to have other inputs and listen to what other people are doing rather than to feel threatened by it. But it takes a certain amount of being confident in your own skin as being a composer to not feel threatened by other people, but to appreciate the talents that they bring to the party.
Yeah, and I think that is actually very nice to hear from you as well, because I hear this and I see this from time to time, not just with music. A lot of people are comparing themselves, and they feel like an imposter syndrome almost. Like,
I think as composers, I still get imposter syndrome. You know? I go to an event and people, oh yeah, you we really appreciate what you've done, and I'm thinking, I'm just writing music. But thank you very much. Because that's really what it is. As when you're working on something, you don't feel that you've done something particularly special or wonderful. You were just having fun doing it. So if somebody else appreciates that fun and the experience of creating something, then I'm very happy. That's a win.
But that is also something that kind of pops into my mind when you see somebody really passionate about something. First of all, you can see it in their eyes, but also how they're smiling just talking. I mean, I see you smiling so much just talking about this, and it makes me smile, and I'm just getting super excited for this.
That's great. I mean, as jobs go, it's a super fun job, isn't it? I mean, I've got this bunch of toys in my computers. I get to play with sound, and I'm still intrigued by sound. Yeah. Even down to the waveform level, I've got this thing called, it's from Yuhi, and it's called Zebralet, and it's Zebralet 3, or I think it's their new one. Yeah. And you can just experiment down to the waveform and wavetables and mathematical equations. Think, when you go to school and you think, why am I doing this level of maths? I will never use this. Yeah. And here I am, late in my career, and suddenly I'm putting together mathematical equations to get sound together. Yeah. Who'd have thought,
Does sound also have the golden ratio that people talk about with pictures and so on? Like that shell thing.
I don't know. I've got no idea what the golden ratio is. Oh. So I'm going to have to research that.
Yeah, basically they usually have a picture showing like a shell, how it's perfect in so many shapes and forms that are utilized in so many things. People utilize the golden ratio in furniture, clothing, and so on, because the golden ratio is kind of the best kind of form that kind of is catching to the eye. But I'm thinking, like, is there a golden ratio for audio?
There probably is, because we've got this frequency range.
Yeah.
And we've got these melodies, we've got the bass, which needs to be really tight. But then we need the icing on the cake. So we need pretty bits that we're not necessarily hearing for the first time. It's only when you replay it, think, that's a nice bit there. And it's all part of the tapestry.
Yeah.
And having the frequency range covered and magical bits that come in, that you realise perhaps on the second or third listening, that's probably that golden ratio.
Yeah, maybe. I like how we're thinking about this now. But do you think about these kind of ranges and so on when you're creating music, or are you more go with the flow type of person?
It normally takes me a while to actually write something and complete something, so I'll go with the flow initially, and then when you've had a couple of days off for it and you come back, you're thinking, it's missing like an answer, or it's missing some of those higher frequencies. We're not using the whole, we're missing a trick here. We can make, because often you can make something sound much better by putting something else in, or taking something else out, or changing it. And it's all about backing up that main instrument. How do we support what we want the listener to hear?
Yeah, it is insane. But on the topic of listening in, I think it is a great segue to go into the next track of the week. Okay. Because this one was a little bit of a mindfuck for me, and you will soon get to know why. So, everybody else, we're going to listen to the track called Cloud Castle. Fading out, Cloud Castle. My emotion for this one, this is like the longest emotion I had throughout this, and everybody's gonna know why. There's a lot to take in this track, first of all. There are many sounds happening, at one time. But in the background here, majority of the track, we can hear this metallic sound. Yet again, returning a little bit kind of from the Fishy factory, I don't know. But it kind of sounds like a combo between knives cutting and a keychain getting fiddled with. The track, however, does have a flute, and when the first tones come in, and this happened so many times when I was playing the game, the first tones that kind of comes in, sure as hell, reminds me instantly of Sonic and the Chemical Zone. Wow. But since the tone only comes, and then it stops, and then it kind of doesn't do anything, I kind of filled that one in, and then it kind of came back with something totally different.
Yeah, I was talking about space earlier.
Yeah.
So you get da-da-dun, da-da-dun, and you've got that gap. And
yeah.
I'm not filling it in, but I was thinking
everybody else fills it in.
Whilst I was listening to it, that I could have easily filled that in, and I'm glad I refrained from doing it.
But that's great. I mean, I loved it. For me, it felt very nostalgic to some sense. Even though this is a full original piece, this is not sounding like Chemical Zone at all. It was just me getting those like 3 tones, and my mind just woo.
You know, sometimes when you listen to Zelda, I often think that the Kondo-san has probably put limitations on his style or his composition, so he might only have a 5-note phrase or 5 notes that he's within, and he's put everything else around it to stretch the narrative. And I think here I've done some things similar, not consciously but subconsciously. So den didden, den didden, den didden, den didden. Because music is about communication. It's about speaking. So here we're trying to communicate little bits of information and just spitting them out every now and again. And then you've got the echo, and then the melody is developing on there. And all the time we've got this sequence, and I'm thinking I'm using Yuhi's Batzilla here for the sequence, and it's an underlying bed. So it starts off with that sequence going, and it's all, you know, you've created this bed for the listener. We've got the expectation there, and then you can just plonk the melody and start the lyrical conversation of what do you know, it's like saying, what do you think, what we're going to do next? It's that kind of thing.
But it kind of becomes this kind of love dance in between the instruments as well. It's like the flute is like trying to call you, and somebody answers, and then they answer that call, and so on. Completely.
And I only think about it post after I've done it. Whilst I'm in the zone, I'm not thinking about these kind of conversations. It's interesting online when you see people and they've pulled your track apart and they say, oh, he's done this.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I wasn't thinking that at
all. But how does it make you feel like when you're having your thoughts of what you produce and so on, and you're noticing people are taking in like something entirely different? Does that feel like you're alienating yourself in that sense? Like, do I even know music? Or how do you feel about those parts?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you're creating something, you're in the zone. I often talk about being in the zone.
Yeah.
And you've got to be in that escapism. You know, it's nice to escape from reality, which I suppose is why we play video games. You know, you dive into Zelda. You are not in the moment, are you? You're in the Zelda moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is great, which is why video games are great, because we can just escape to somewhere else quite instantly. And I have the same experience writing music. I get in the zone, and I'm being creative, and you know, that is my happy place.
Yeah.
So here I am in the thing, and I'm just thinking, what are you trying to do here? Like, you know, let's start talking to the next instrument that's getting a reply. And there's all of these things going on just to create this bed.
Yeah.
To put the actual melody on. We've got the pace, and the pace. We've got a tuned drum, which is kind of subtle in the background. It comes out later on. And then we've got these other instruments interacting in the same key, the same scale, and just putting it on. But I don't think about those things when I'm writing it. I just think, oh, that sounds nice.
So you're really going with the flow. But considering your way of composition, do you usually just go from A to B, or do you work on different sections and then you kind of paste them together? Or what's your style of when you compose a new piece?
Well, I'll tell you how I try to work. It never works out like this, but I often come down in the morning, just spend 40 minutes to an hour writing a sketch, maybe on the piano, just to get an idea.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's for a warehouse, then that's what we're going to do for this. So we get this kind of rhythm going, and then I'll put a rough melody in of where I want to go. Now, if I like it, I'll come back to it and carry on with the composition, start layering, putting meat on the bones, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
If I don't like it, I'll go out for a bike ride, come back and try again. And I'll try that 3 times maximum in the day. If it's not working after the 3rd time, it's not going to happen that day. You know, just give up.
Okay.
Work on production or something. So that's how it normally starts. But invariably, once you get an idea, 8 hours later, you're still in the studio. You haven't eaten.
Classic.
And you've got this track that's in a form that we can come back. They normally take a few days to work on, probably a week. But it's good to have something that you've worked on, give it a rest for a while, might be 20 minutes, might be 2 hours, and then come back to it. And at some point you get locked in, and off you go again.
Inspiration strikes again.
It does. You kind of get sucked in, don't you? And before you know it, It's like 2 o'clock. It was last night, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And that particular piece I was working on last night, there were 3 sections. I've got section A, section B, and section C now. Section C is the real meat potatoes, but section B is the lead up to it. And without section B being a lot calmer, you wouldn't feel the impact of section C. But section C is too obvious, so we need an intro, and that was section A. And it has elements, so there's a logical reason for why these parts exist. And although, it's completely random as well, because even if I like something, it doesn't mean that the person who's listening to it, because we all listen to things differently, it's going to agree with my thought process, or they might find it too messy or something, or vice versa. I can do something and think, oh, this is absolute rubbish, but they want to hear what I've done. Oh, this is great. Yeah. I'm thinking, okay, right, I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
It's really down to the person who's listening to the piece of music to decide whether it's a good piece of music or not. And you don't know until you've actually done something. So all you can do is, first thing in the morning, have a purpose for what you need to write and get on with it.
Do you ever feel like when you're out walking, let's say you have a day with the family and so on, you're not supposed to do any work, but you just get this strike of inspiration, like, God damn it, this is a good melody.
Yeah, I've got a good way of remembering things. So if it does, I can remember it. Worst case scenario, I've got my phone with me. I can just type in. I've done that before. I sang a melody.
Yep.
And basically just say, this is in G minor. It goes to B. Then we're going to C. And then when we get to the next section, it's an E flat. Here's the melody. And then I can come back to the studio and try it and think, oh no, that's rubbish, or oh no, that has legs. It's got something. And I've done that a few times before.
Yeah, that's nice. So, just like every other composer, you're a workaholic.
You don't stop. You don't switch off, do you?
Exactly.
It just, you can be. Yeah, it's not. I don't see it as being a workaholic. It's just enjoying what I'm doing.
Yeah, of course. I'm only exaggerating here.
Yeah, I know, but it's amazing how many people refer to it being a workaholic, and sometimes you have to be. And that's the worst kind of thing. But sometimes you're just inspired and you're enjoying what you're doing.
Exactly.
It's a happy place. Off we go. Yeah, come on, let's crack on.
I think the difference being also a passionate person versus being a workaholic. A workaholic is something that you're doing too much for the wrong reason, in my opinion. While being passionate, you can do something, you enjoy it, and you gladly do it.
Oh, yeah, completely. And I also find it good for the soul, for mental health and things like that. When I'm composing, that is a calm place for me. I'm creating and I'm doing things and I'm focused and I'm in the zone. And there's no better place, really, although there are better places. But, that's on the whole, that's a good constant place to be in that creative zone.
But for me, I'm a level designer myself. I prefer a lot about the pre-production of things. So from your perspective as a composer, what's your favorite part of making music? Is it more the early stages where you can be iterative with the process, or are you more happy when you get to the end of a project where you can finalize it? Or
I'm happy with both, really. There's a different experience. Obviously, when you get towards the end, you think, finished. Yeah, there we go. We've done another one. But and by finished is we can't really afford to spend any more time on that. So let's present it and see how we go, and let's wait for some feedback. But I think really that the best place to be is probably at the early stage of it. That's the more fun bit. Not that the rest of it isn't fun. It's all fun. Of course. It's all fun in different ways. So.
Is it the good or the best? Everything is good. There's no negatives.
And sometimes it depends, doesn't it? You might have done something and you're really pleased that you've actually finished it, and so that's the best part of it. Sometimes you come up with a really creative idea, and so that's cool. Sometimes you've managed to put all the instrumentations, because using different voicings changes the way things appear, and changes the emotion, even if you've got the same melody and the same backing. Yeah. So there's all of these different things that you can overthink. So on the whole, I just get on with it and enjoy it anyway.
Yeah. And that's the most important takeaway. Enjoy things.
Yeah, it's hard. If you don't enjoy composing, then it's not for you. Go and find something else to do. Yeah.
Definitely. You're not going to force it, because then I think the music will kind of come through, like we talked a little bit earlier. It's like when you're passionate, you can see it. Of course, when you're passionate, you can also hear it. So if you're forcing something out, I don't think you will enjoy that product as much as you could. That's what I believe.
And also, when I was younger, and I needed to remember an idea. I've got a way of putting things on a graph so I can remember the rhythm, I can remember the pitches.
Yep.
And then come back and work on that later.
Okay.
And if you've forgotten it, it probably wasn't a very good idea in the first place. But if you can remember it, it's probably got legs.
That's true as well. I usually say that for things I try to remember, not just with melodies or anything. It's just me generally on the day. It's like, there was something I was supposed to ask you, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
It might not have been as important then.
Exactly.
So I guess there's some truth to that, though. But going back to this specific track here, as I wrote here in my emotion, there's a lot of things going on in this track, but not at the same time. It kind of works in, I would kind of say, in some sort of a minimalistic way. Overall, with this track, it kind of has this calm and serene sense to it. Nothing kind of shoots off into cyberspace or anything with this track. But there's still a lot of things going on with a lot of different sounds and so on. When it comes to making a track, well, this one is 5 minutes and 34 seconds. When people listen to this, they're not going to listen to the full 5 minutes. They're only going to have a bite size of the track itself. But
yeah.
Do you feel like when you're trying to represent a song within a game, is there a limit to how many layers or instruments and so on you can utilize for one track? Or is that all depending on the game itself?
I think it's on the game, the instrumentation. There are so many factors involved, and I think this is kind of that Robert Fripp type of experience where it's meant to have different layers that work off each other, bounce off each other, come in, come out, disappear. And it's more of a, I don't know, almost, I'll get the word in a second, where you... Because it's kind of an important place to be, isn't it? It's that mental thing, you know, when you're trying to calm yourself down. What's the word? It'll come to me in a bit when we're talking. So
usually when I think about it, I usually say I just go Zen mode.
Oh, I see. I think the word I'm looking for is meditative.
Yep. Okay.
You know, it's almost like a meditation. So these bits that are coming out, they're calming.
Yeah.
And then when they're not calming, that's another useful thing. But this one was definitely meant to be meditative in its approach. So there's lots of different things, but they're all working with each other. You have too much of a good thing, but I think we've probably got the balance right here.
Yeah. And like a typical thing I usually tend to hear with something going on with air and something like that, it's like how I can represent thinking about a cloud castle. Of course, we're up in the air in the game as well. They usually tend to, because I'm guessing this is one of those Japanese flutes that we hear inside this track.
Yeah, I think it would have been originally, and then the flute player has recreated the way it's been played.
Because for me, when I listened to this specific track, it didn't give me the sense of air itself. It's just calming for me. And one of the reasons I might think that is the flute itself kind of does these, well, in my comparison, short notes. It's like when they use a flute or something, they kind of tend to drag out these notes sometimes and get that kind of wind kind of feeling.
So I've got other things, like the percussion is actually compressed air. I've used compressed air samples and then put them into a program called Tal Drum and use the envelope to give it a bit of impact, a bit of saturation. And also the fade out as well, so it sounds more like a clap or something, I don't know, percussive, but also with a nice tail. So give it that kind of reverberation sound. Whereas the flute is having, as I said before, it's having the conversation over the top. And the rest of it it's meant to sound like flying. Yeah. If you know, it's quite a subjective thing.
Yeah, of course.
You know, we're floating along, and at the same time, we've got this flute just giving the communication over the top.
Yeah, and usually when people talking about fly being free and so on, they usually have this calm and serene kind of vibe as well. So it still kind of sticks to it and make it viable, in my opinion.
Yeah. One thing I don't like, and I tend to stay away from it unless I'm being very specific about it, is long notes.
Okay. Is there a specific reason why, for that matter?
If I'm honest, I've seen some jazz bands and they'll have long, morose notes in them. And it doesn't sound like fun to me. Whereas shorter notes, bouncier melodies, because again, you know, it's a game about Imotaro, this little green kind of character,
Yeah.
and he's fun. So we don't want to drag him down. We need to keep him bouncing along throughout the level. So even though it's about air and it's kind of flying, we need to keep it fun, bouncy.
Yeah. And of course, considering with the whole mechanic going on within the game, I mean, you have this star that you're like throwing around with the physics and so on. It's not going slow, that one.
No, not at all.
It's everywhere, nowhere at the same time.
True, and also with music, it's a bit like food. You know, we want contrast in there.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know, if you've got something soft in the middle, we want a nice crispy exterior over the top. And by having both at the same time, you know, by pushing a knife into this, whatever it is, and you've got something crispy and something soft at the same time, it's a nice experience. And the same with music. You know, if you've got something calming and you've got something not so calming and they're bouncing off each other.
So the crisps in this song is the metallic sounds that I hear in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about texture, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah. But as we utilize these metallic sounds in the factory before, as utilizing it as a production line, what was the metallic sounds for Cloud Castle then?
They're using compressed air. So it's and I want air, clouds.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes from, and they sound metallic just from the effects I put on. I've saturated the sound to give it a bit more bite, and then I put an envelope on it so it floats.
Nice. But that sounds like a great kind of segue also to the next one. But because this is the last track of the week, we're going to listen to the second version of the boss battle, from what I understand. There were a lot of different tracks on this one, so I took the second one because it felt more appropriate to as an ending here. So we're going to listen to the Munto boss, and this is going to be called a loop, T130. And there we're fading out the amazing track of Munto Boss Music, the final boss in the game. Spoilers! Kind of says Munto Boss, so figured. So, my emotion for the last track of the week here. I really like the contrast here. The boss felt very hectic and aggressive, and listening in on this music by itself, I can tell that that's not the case. The Munto Boss track is very dramatic, but also emotional. I can't fully set down what style this specific track is, but considering that the soundtrack is a combo between the Swedish and Japanese style, I find it hard as a Swede to pinpoint it as Swedish, so is this a Japanese style by any chance?
No, I mean, it came from... Nicholas had given me this tune that he quite liked, and he wanted it to have the same kind of vibe. So I listened to the track several times, and I'd also written the first Munto boss as well. Tried to keep that in mind as well. And then came up with something, and I don't think I hit the vibe at all with what they were wanting.
Yeah.
But it kind of stuck. This is the style we're going with. This is the version. But it is, I mean, it's also got different timing in it as well, so which is also a good way of getting people off guard. You know, you're fighting a boss, you want them to mess up, so if there's not a strict rhythm there, or it loses a beat every now and again, that's a very good way of putting the player off.
So we're putting the players off by fudging with their hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the timing, we're taking away beats every so often, periodically, and it's a good way of adding the tension.
So are we basically spoiling now that if we play this game on mute, it will be easier?
It might be.
I've got
no idea.
Please don't.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's supposed to be is, we're adding a rhythm, we're adding a tension, and hopefully adding to the gameplay experience as well if we've done our job properly as composers.
Yeah. But one thing that always comes to mind for me as a level designer, it usually comes down to is like if I've done great level design, the players won't even. It doesn't feel like I've moved them in a certain way, even though that was the full plan. But I'm guessing that also is coming down to the music, that you want people to be represented within the music itself, to be part of the music. So, of course, people don't say it's a bad music or it's the world's best music. It's like trying to find that sense where the music was just perfect in that sense. How is that when working from a composition part and trying to hit that note? Is it hard to trying to find that, or is it more of a gut feeling, or are we talking about the ranges again that we talked previously about?
Yeah, I don't really overthink it. I'll go for a gut feeling, so I'll try, hopefully get it right the first time. It doesn't always happen, but yeah, I'll go for that gut feeling. We've also got a bit of a direction to follow, but I still went for that gut thing that is, okay, I've heard what you'd like, but this is my solution to that problem. Yeah.
One thing that I like so much that you kind of talk about, and I really love that we're iterating a little bit on it and creating more functionality surrounding it, is even though you're working with the ranges, you're working with a lot of different kind of structure when it comes to composition, it always comes down to kind of gut feeling or what, of course, the producers want from a studio and so on. And I feel like you're really hitting a good point here, that even with gut feeling and so on from only a few people can add a lot of perspective on the game in total. And that's something that I find is very magical when it comes to video game music. I myself, when I grew up, I didn't listen that much to video game music. Just like you're talking in the beginning, that it sounds like a doorbell. For me, the video game music was kind of like rock and roll music. It was the devil's work to my my parents.
That's good. I like that. That's quite an accolade, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey.
And for me, then listening in on this, it's an adventure for me to listen in on video game music, especially how it kind of transcends over time. Because I mean, for you who've been working for so long in so many different consoles and generations of consoles, it has been a journey just to talk to you right now for me. Talking about how you kind of work, how you kind of think about the process and so on. And just figuring out, not just figuring out, but listening in on everything, that it kind of comes down to what you kind of worked over time. Might have been a structure from the beginning, but today it's a gut feeling for you in a better sense.
Yeah, definitely. It's more about how you feel things. And it's always a better place to be. I think when you're working on things mathematically, you're approaching things slightly differently. And I think with this one as well, I did want to get the time to, the time signatures to be different and varied. And then once I got that going, it was then a case of putting the melody on top. And so I play it over and over and over again until it naturally comes and you get these ideas from the melody.
Okay.
And it's got some guitar things in there as well, which I can't remember doing those, but just listening back to it, I'm quite pleased with those.
That is awesome. Do you usually tend to return to, except for when you're talking in an interview or so on, do you listen to the music yourself after you're done with them?
No, never. No.
I don't have time. You just need to go to the next one.
Yeah, I don't have time. Go to the next one. It's only when I've listened to a lot of the Donkey Kong stuff lately because we've done some of it live. Yeah, and that's always kind of cool. And then I've tried to do something new with it, but you have to go back to the original to realise where you came from. But on the whole, no, once I've done something, I like to move on to the next thing. I've done that. Okay. On to the next. Otherwise, you'd be continually listening to your back catalogue and it's probably not healthy either. And there's so much music in the world, isn't there? There are so many new and interesting things that you're never going to get bored or dull, and it's just nice to go and explore what somebody else has done. What bits resonate with you that you want to kind of put into your music? Why do you want to put them there? Because we don't just want to lift them, we want to be inspired by it. And what can we do to develop that idea and utilize it within our own work?
Yeah. No, well said. Considering just how many people we've been talking to just from when I was younger. Like in the beginning it was rock, and then it was glam rock, and all of a sudden we have thrash metal, black metal, all these other metals. We're gonna have a periodic system just for metal genres.
For metal music. And to be honest, to the outside listener, if you're not into metal, all sounds the same.
Exactly.
It's just
They're all
loud,
screaming.
Yeah, exactly. Screaming, rock music, guitars, devil's music.
That's great. No, but as we're closing down a little bit more on this, I of course have still 200 questions, it feels like, but we need to close this at one point. So, but when it comes to music such as the boss music here, is it harder or easier to make boss music, for example? Because, of course, considering the full game and so on, boss music always tends to have some sort of crescendo at one point.
Yeah, I mean, the magic of music, or trying to get the music to be magic, is about dynamic. You've got to make the music, it's got to move, but you need a lot more movement in a boss music for it to work, really. Yeah. So it's about, dynamics, how we get from one place to the other, how we take it down and build it back up again, all of those things. So for me, the dynamic element is really important for boss music. And also, it's got to sound mean as well. You've got to... It's got to sound desperate. It's either do or die.
Yeah. I really enjoy that answer. It brings a little bit more contrast to it as well. And of course, I think it's the honest thing, considering as a composer where the hardship is and where, of course, the easy part could be as well. And that could theoretically be also very depending on the composer itself. Some composers might really shine as a boss musician and really be bad at something else, for example. We all have our kind of area where we feel more confident in our composition, I guess.
I guess so. For me, it's did I get a good night's sleep? What mood am I in?
Am I in evil boss mode now? Or?
Yeah, or not.
Yeah.
So if I'm in evil boss mode, then it's going to be a good evil boss. And sometimes when you're not, you just got to leave it a day or two and come back to it when you're feeling angry again.
Go out into the open world and just listen to people being silly.
Yes, go to the local shop. Listen to people being completely unreasonable about their bread or their milk being, and come back home and take it out on the keyboards.
Yeah. This is a banger! Literally.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a very expensive morning.
Yeah. Hope I earn that paycheck soon. You need your keyboard. Or you need to be really fidgety yourself so you can just do the repairs yourself.
Yeah, I suppose, just load in with caffeine,
Exactly. So, let's close down with two final questions. Okay. And of course, I always tend to want to end on a good vibe. So the first question is going to be the bad one. I'll do these exclamation marks. So when it comes to the soundtrack of Gimmick 2, what was the greatest challenge you had while making this? Could have been like utilizing an instrument? Was it a specific track that was really hard to set down, or...
I think the great, challenge, I like a challenge anyway, but it was learning about the nickel harper and how that works, because that's the core of the soundtrack, really.
Yeah.
What instruments work with it, but fortunately, folk, it's folk music has already given us the answers to that, so it works really well with flute, works really well with accordion and acoustic guitar. And so it was just working out the range, how the strings are sympathetic, how far can you stray from the original keys that we used to, and there's a reason why the nickel harper works in certain keys. So it was mainly, that was the biggest challenge, and then the rest of it was...
Yeah. Okay. Was it helpful to have Joel, for example, then?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Joel, as I said at the beginning, awesome musician, just this resource of musical wonderfulness, and especially when it comes to Swedish instruments as well.
Yeah.
So super useful. Really appreciate his input. Very good musician.
So I'm guessing the challenge could have been so much more if you didn't have him, for example.
Definitely, he certainly brought
a lot to the table.
Yeah, a lot to the table. Added an extra layer of magic that wouldn't have been possible without you. So thank you, Yul. It was, good job. Really wonderful. A wonderful person as well.
Yeah, definitely. And going over to the good part then. What felt like the biggest achievement when it comes to the soundtrack of Gimmick? What was it to get to know the nickel harpa as well?
Yeah, that was an achievement. I think getting the first track done, there's a boat track, which so getting that one done, I think it got the right feel, set the whole tone up for the rest of the game. Another one that I like, I think it's called Munto Vast, and there's a virtual instrument which is two CS80s, Yamaha CS80, which Vangelis used to use, and I'm using this. It's called the GX80 from Cherry Audio. Okay. And it's just got some of the most wonderful synth sounds of any synth ever on there. And Pella was saying, we need, he's Yamato standing at the top of a mountain, looking out and surveying the world that's out before us. We need something that's fast. And this synth really suited it. And for me, that is my favourite track on this soundtrack. So it was great fun to make, and it's just got a feeling. I suppose I was probably in a certain mode mentally for it as well. Might not have been the most healthiest mode to be in as a human. But by creating this track, it just made me feel better about life.
Was this one of those tracks that was easier for you to compose as well, or were you struggling with it, even though that you felt like it was such an achievement in the end?
To be honest, I don't think any composition is easy. It's rewarding, and this was very rewarding.
That's great. That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's just one of those things. Mentally, it just made me feel better. I've managed to get the demons out in this piece of music, and it just puts everything in context, as in, overall, if you were looking out at the world, looking at, say, the Northern Lights, and we've had so many different lights in the sky in the UK over the last few days, really. And it's one of those, you're looking out across the sunset and, what a wonderful place. So whatever's going on in your life, you can just look out and things are always better in the distance. Things that are coming, you can go towards it or you can choose to be caught up in what you're doing. But there's always a way out. There's always a better place to get to. And this is that kind of piece of music.
Amazing. I love that answer. Definitely. I think I'm going to use it as a quote.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, music is a way of sorting yourselves out mentally, isn't it?
It is.
We all go through struggles. And for me, I find writing music a very good way of putting everything in perspective. And I said earlier, when you finished a piece of music, it feels very rewarding. I can remember just turning all the lights off and just listening to this as super loud, over and over and over again. And I'm really pleased with that piece of music. So from the whole soundtrack, there's, I love creating all of it. But when I'd finished that piece of music, I just thought, yeah.
Oh, that's great. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for creating this amazing soundtrack.
Thank you.
It was amazing playing through the game. It was amazing listening through the tracks by themselves as well. So personally, I'm looking forward to, because I know from perspective of the developers, they are looking for ways to distribute this so more people can just listen to the music and not just through the video game. In this sense. So I'm looking forward to be able to listen to it later as well. It's going to be amazing.
Great stuff. Cool. So I hope people enjoy it, because I really enjoyed making it.
Yep. I can tell from my point of view here. You really did. And I really hope it kind of shone through in this episode as well, because it's been an amazing time spending with you here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So with that said, I think it's time for us to just buckle everything up with Gimmick 2. So focusing a little bit back on you, moving onward from Gimmick here. what's the next step here that you can talk about? I know there's a lot of NDAs and so on, so we can already skip those unless you want to say, I'm working on X projects or something like that. But I know you can't say anything on NDAs.
Yeah, I mean, we're having this conversation today, and today, game called Nico de Rico, which I started back in 2019.
Ooh, that's a couple of years, yeah?
Well, yeah, 5 years ago, and I was working on it during lockdown in 2020 and 2021. So I was very pleased to be able to do that. I finished it off really over the last few weeks.
Oh,
just
okay.
to tidy a few bits up and, dust it down and do some final mastering. But yeah, we're going back years for this game, and it's a homage to things like platformers like Mario, Donkey Kong, and also Crash Bandicoot as well. It's got those traditional things. So it was another great fun game to make, and all the developers I work with tend to be really cool people, really, really useful and real good fun to work with. So this was another one of those that I really enjoyed working on. And check it out, Nico de Rico. It's a bit of a strange name. It's a very specific name, but it's also got that retro vibe. And, if anyone wants a fix of platforming and Crash and that kind of game that you can play on any platform, it's not just on the Switch. It's on Steam, it's on PS5 as well, it's on Xbox too. So everyone can enjoy this platforming piece of nostalgia. Well, it's not even nostalgia, is it? It's kind of a retold for a time.
Yeah, it's new, but it grasps our nostalgia.
Yes, absolutely. So pick it up, it's good fun. Enjoy making that one too.
Yep.
Everything else I'm working on is definitely NDA.
Yeah. So we'll skip those for now, and we'll keep in touch. So we can cover these in the future.
Indeed, but there's some cool stuff coming up, and again, new challenges, stuff that I've really enjoyed making.
That is awesome. I'm looking forward to everything there. So if people want to reach out to you, maybe they have a question or anything like that, is there any way they can reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter.
Yep.
YouTube. I'm going to get my website back up and running. There was a problem with somebody who was not being very kind to me, so I took it down. It's being rebuilt at the moment. Yep. So my website, there'll be an address, but we'll put those on the channel and people can reach out if they'd like to. Yep.
It's gonna be David_Wise if people want to be stressed about it. But yeah, all the different links and so on, we will post those in the episode description.
I'm also on Instagram as well. Yep. Can't remember what I'm called on. I think it's Mad Dog Dave actually on Instagram. Just mad_dog_Dave. And that goes back to ages ago. I was in rehearsal and kind of goes back to the Back to the Future 3, that series, and somebody. I was probably being like a mad scientist and Mad Dog Dave.
Mad Dog. Oh, that's amazing. I love when people have old nicknames and so on. I'm not super fond of mine because people were thinking I was like a handicap or something, because my first nickname was Lamer.
Okay.
So people just took the lame part. I was like, are you handicapped or something? It's like, no. It's like the early days when people were a lamer, they were not that... They were bad players, basically. Okay.
I mean, the Mad Dog Dave bit, I didn't even put it in. It just came up in Instagram. So I thought, well, I'm not going to argue. We'll just go with it.
That's awesome. No, but all the different links and everything will be in the mission. The episode description.
Excellent. Mission will there. Dave on a mission.
That's amazing. That's amazing. No, but yeah, that is the end of the episode. So, is there anything else you would like to say to people or anything? Maybe a quote of the day, or I don't know.
Just thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. So, with that said, thank you so much, David Wise, for joining in.
You're welcome, and thank you for listening. The fact that anybody wants to listen or is interested, it always tickles me. That's kind of cool.
I'm just super excited for these. Like every time I'm getting a guest on the show, a composer, an artist, I'm just super excited. And
excellent.
I haven't told you this, but when we got in contact and we sat down at this date that we're recording now, I couldn't even keep myself at this computer. I had to stand up and start punching like the air because I was so excited. I was like, I'm gonna talk to David Wise.
You see, and for me, it's like I don't get that because I have to talk to myself often enough. Come on, Dave, you can do this. So.
But in the end, this is so nice to just talk to you, and it feels very calm, and I feel very comfortable just talking to you.
That's great. I'm pleased. I'd be very worried if you weren't.
Yeah, like I'm starstruck, and I was like, all the time. There's no episodes being done today.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's very kind, but I don't really get starstruck because we're all just trying to, to get through. Yeah, exactly. I'm just doing what I can do because I'm rubbish at everything else. Yeah.
That's what it is in the end. But yeah, for everybody else who's listening in, if you want to find other episodes of the Gameable audio, you find that on Spotify or in your closest podcast app. Feel free to follow or comment on one of our social medias, either on Facebook or on Instagram. Just search for Gameable audio and you'll find us there. Just giving a comment or just following helps a lot of other people to find this podcast and get to know David in this case more.
Cool. Excellent.
And also, if you want to support this podcast for future content upgrades and quality upgrades, feel free to become a Patreon backer as well. In the end, when I don't need any more money, I will, of course, give the money back to new composers, basically. Working as a fund. Yes.
Yeah, that can't come quickly enough.
So if David doesn't work it out anymore, we will give him money so he can buy new instruments that he destroyed.
Exactly. Mad Dog Dave.
Our current awesome backers that we have today is Daniel Undermark, Lars Schenström, Titti Schenström, Kevin Wikström, Mike Björkholm, Mats El Kebabo Tapper Holmqvist, and Sanders Wikström. And also, as I said before, all the different links that we will provide will be available in the, not mission, it will be in the episode description. In the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about indie games, and this is with a young Finnish guy called Jaakko Mela that I actually met earlier this year. So it's going to be super exciting. I don't know much about the games that he has worked on, so it's going to be exciting for me just to get to know somebody that is kind of still coming out of like school and so on, working on multiple games and so on their own time. And also working a little bit more on Finland, since I don't know too much about video game development and music composition from that part. And also the podcast theme music was, as always, composed by the amazing Thor Myrdal. And with that said, this is the end of the episode. This was episode 47 on Gimmick 2, together with David Wise. I am your host, Christofer Schenström, and this is Gameable Audio, the video game podcast that you're listening to. With that said, I want to thank everybody for listening in. And see you all guys next time.
And here's David Wise saying goodbye.
And with that, we're back in present time. I want to say a big sorry for making this episode a delayed one. But due to sickness and everything, that kind of got in the way with everything going on during December. And as I previously informed everybody else, I am currently out of a job as well. So I've actually needed this time, so I want to thank everybody for having understanding of this being a little bit of a later release. But yeah, all in all, with 2024, it has been an amazing year. The podcast grew a lot during this time, and I want to thank everybody for joining and following the show and sharing it with friends and family, sharing it online to strangers if you feel like this is an amazing episode or a podcast overall to share. Big thank you for that. And I want to give also, as I move on now from 2024, we have had some struggles with the podcast during this year, but I want to give a special thank out to Videospelsklubben and specifically the one who runs it all, Stefan Gassamaluk-Ganser. Thank you so much for all the years that I've been able to put and place my expertise of podcasting and everything into the community of Videospelsklubben. And I want to specially thank Spotify as well for creating an easy and access hosting service so I could move my podcast from Videospelsklubben to Spotify as the Videospelsklubben is closing down as well. So with that, I want to thank from the bottom of my heart everybody who listened in this year, followed, shared, and everything. And I'm moving into 2025 with a lot of new kind of I am excited, to say the least. I can't really find the words right now as I'm recording this. But before I move on and say goodbye for 2024 now, I want to also give a large shout out to the people behind the game of Gimmick 2. Clear River Games, who worked with the publishing and so on, and Bitwave Games, that worked on the game developing it. We got one code that will be gift away on Patreon. This will happen on my birthday, the 2nd of January in 2025. And everybody who basically comes in and purchase a subscription, because during this time I will also make a little bit of a campaign where people can get their first month for free. But everybody who makes an active purchase up to the 2nd of January will be in this raffle. So I will not include anybody who takes the gift from the campaign, just to have that stated. So yeah, that is it. The raffle will work as always, as usual. So everybody who joins in on different tiers will have different amount of tickets, and everybody will be active in that one. And the game, it is Gimmick 2, of course, is going to be a digital code, and it can either be redeemed on Switch or on Steam. Of course, the winner will have to get in contact with me, and I will be in contact with the guy I have at that runs this, that will get us the code. So you will be able to select basically which platform you would like to have the game on. So yeah, with that said, thank you so much, everybody. Have a really nice Christmas now, and have a happy new year. See you all in 2025. Chris out.